In the heart of a city that never sleeps, inside a skyscraper of glass and steel, a man's worth was measured by the clean floors he left behind. Leo Martinez was a ghost, a janitor working the night shift, invisible to the titans of industry who walked the halls. His world was the scent of disinfectant and the quiet hum of the building after dark. Above him, on the 50th floor, sat Isabella Sterling, the silent CEO. A widow who inherited an empire. She hadn't spoken a word in a meeting in over a year. They were two people living in different universes, separated by a million unspoken rules. But one night, a high-stakes negotiation, a failed translation, and a single perfectly spoken sentence would shatter the silence and change everything. The world of Leo Martinez smelled of lemon-scented ammonia and industrial-grade floor wax. It was a world measured in square feet and the steady rhythmic shush-swoosh of his mop gliding across pristine marble. By day, the headquarters of Ethelred Innovations was a hive of frantic energy, a place where fortunes were made and lost in the space of a single keystroke. By night, it was his kingdom, a silent, cavernous space where the only echoes were the ones he made himself. Leo was 42, but the lines etched around his eyes and the slight stoop in his shoulders made him seem older. He had the hands of a man who had known a different life, long, slender fingers, now calloused and rough from pushing a cart and wringing out rags. In his locker, tucked behind his spare uniform, was a worn photograph. It was of a little girl with his same dark eyes and a smile so bright it seemed to generate its own light. Lily, his Lily. She was 9 years old, and she was the alpha and omega of his existence. Every squeak of his cart, every floor polished to a mirror shine, was for her. Lily had a congenital heart defect, a tiny, treacherous flaw in the very engine of her life. The specialists at Johns Hopkins had a new experimental procedure, a glimmer of hope with a price tag that might as well have been the moon. So Leo worked. He worked the day shift at a car wash, breathing in fumes and soap, and the night shift at Ethelred, breathing in the sterile air of corporate success. Sleep was a luxury he traded for another dollar in Lily's medical fund. He was a ghost in this building. The ambitious young executives and sharp-witted analysts who bustled through these halls during the day never saw him. They saw a uniform, a function, a necessary but invisible part of the building's machinery. They'd walk past him, talking loudly on their phones about mergers and acquisitions, their expensive leather shoes scuffing the floors he had just polished. He never minded. Invisibility was a form of peace. His supervisor, Mark Corrigan, made sure he remembered his place. Mark was a man whose ambition had outpaced his talent, leaving him in a perpetual state of sour resentment. He was the facilities manager, a title he wielded like a scepter. "Martinez," he'd bark, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I saw a smudge on the glass of the main conference room. A smudge. We have the board here tomorrow. Do you understand what's at stake? The reflection of this company starts with its reflection. Get it done." Leo would just nod. "Yes, Mr. Corrigan." There was one person in the building, however, who was even more of a ghost than Leo. Her name was Isabella Sterling. She was the CEO. Leo had only ever seen her from a distance. She was a tall, elegant woman in her early 40s, with raven black hair pulled back into a severe bun and a wardrobe of impeccably tailored black and charcoal gray suits. She moved through the hallways with a preternatural quietness, her presence announced only by the sudden hush that fell over any room she entered. The whispers in the break rooms and cleaning closets told her story in hushed, dramatic fragments. She was a genius, they said, a visionary who had helped her late husband, Richard Sterling, build Ethelred Innovations from a garage startup into a global tech behemoth. But a year ago, Richard had been killed in a sudden, tragic car accident. Since then, Isabella had gone silent. She still ran the company, her directives issued through curt, precise emails and her formidable executive assistant. She attended the big meetings, sitting at the head of the vast mahogany table like a specter, her face an unreadable mask. She never spoke, not a word. Her silence was legendary, a source of fear and endless speculation. Some said she was broken by grief. Others said she was cold, ruthless, a machine in a Chanel suit. Leo didn't believe the second theory. Sometimes, late at night, when the building was empty save for the security guards and his own small cleaning crew, he would see her. She'd be standing in her office on the 50th floor, the Eagle's Nest, looking out at the glittering cityscape. She wouldn't be working. She'd just be standing there, a solitary figure against a backdrop of a million lights. From his vantage point on the floor below, cleaning the executive lounge, he couldn't see her expression, but he could feel the weight of her loneliness. It was a feeling he knew well. It was the same silence that filled his small apartment after he'd read Lily a bedtime story over the phone, and the line went dead. One evening, as he was cleaning the executive washroom, he found something on the marble countertop. It was a small sterling silver locket, clearly old and worn smooth with time. It must have slipped off. He knew it was hers. It had a delicate, timeless quality that seemed to match the woman he observed from afar. His first instinct was to turn it into Mark Corrigan, but he hesitated. Mark would probably just toss it in a lost and found box where it would sit for months. Holding the cool metal in his palm, he made a decision. He slipped it into his pocket. He would find a way to return it to her directly. It felt important. It felt human. For the first time, he was contemplating stepping out of the shadows, and the thought was more terrifying than any medical bill. The locket felt heavy in Leo's pocket for the next 2 days. It was a secret, a connection to the silent queen in her glass castle. He kept imagining the right moment to return it. Perhaps he'd see her walking down the hall, and he could simply step forward and say, "Excuse me, Mrs. Sterling, I believe you dropped this." But the words felt clumsy in his mouth. The chasm between a janitor and a CEO felt too wide to cross with a simple sentence. He learned more about her in the snippets of conversation he overheard. Maria, one of the other cleaners, a warm, bustling woman who had been with the company for 20 years, was a font of knowledge. Before Mr. Richard passed, "Oh, you should have seen her," Maria told him one night as they shared a thermos of coffee in the deserted cafeteria. She was the fire, and he was the wind. They'd argue in the hallways about code and design, laughing. Her voice, it was so full of life. She'd know everyone's name. Mine, the security guards, the mailroom guys. She'd ask about my kids. Maria sighed, her eyes misting over. Now, it's like the color has drained from the world for her. That accident didn't just take him. It took a piece of her, too. Leah would see Isabella on her nightly walks through the building. It was a strange ritual. Around 10 p.m., long after every other employee had gone home, she would leave her office and wander the deserted floors. She never seemed to be inspecting anything. It was more like a haunting. She would drift through the cubicle farms, her hands sometimes ghosting over the back of an empty chair. She'd stand in the lounge looking at the photos of company picnics from years past, her expression distant. Leo made sure to stay out of her path. He would see her coming and quietly steer his cart into a side office or an empty conference room, waiting for her to pass. It was during one of these observations that he noticed a recurring detail. Whenever she seemed most lost in thought, her hand would go to her neck, to the spot where the locket would have been. Her fingers would flutter there for a moment, a subconscious gesture of seeking comfort, before she seemed to realize it was gone, and her hand would drop, her shoulders slumping just a fraction. He saw the pain in that small, repeated movement. It wasn't the coldness of a corporate machine. It was the hollow ache of loss. He knew that ache. He felt it every time he looked at his wife's side of the bed, empty for 5 years now. The opportunity to return the locket came unexpectedly. He was polishing the floor outside the main boardroom. The immense glass walls were all that separated him from the 49th floor. Inside, Isabella was sitting alone at the enormous table, a single tablet casting a blue glow on her face. Her assistant, a severe-looking woman named Eleanor, had just left for the night. This was it. His heart hammered against his ribs. It was just one person, a lonely person, like him. He took a deep breath, clutching the locket in his hand. He pushed his cart to the side and walked toward the glass door. His reflection was a stark contrast to the opulence inside. A man in a plain gray uniform against a backdrop of polished mahogany and leather. He raised his hand and knocked softly. Twice. Isabella's head snapped up. Her eyes, which were usually distant and unfocused, sharpened on him with an intensity that took his breath away. There was no anger in them, just pure, unfiltered surprise. No one ever disturbed her after hours. He pushed the door open a crack. "Mrs. Sterling, I'm so sorry to interrupt." His voice was raspy, unused to speaking to anyone of her stature. She didn't speak. She just watched him, her expression guarded. He took a step into the room, holding out his hand, palm up. The silver locket gleamed under the recessed lighting. "I found this in the executive washroom a few nights ago. I believe it's yours." She stared at the locket, and for a fleeting second, the mask of stoic control shattered. Her eyes widened, and a wave of raw emotion, relief, grief, something more, washed over her features. Her hand flew to her neck, confirming its absence. She rose from her chair and crossed the room in a few silent strides. She didn't take the locket immediately. She just looked at him, her gaze searching his face as if trying to understand why he hadn't just turned it in. "You kept it safe," she said. Her voice was a low, melodic whisper, like the rustle of dry leaves. It was the first time he had ever heard it, and it was nothing like the commanding tone he had imagined. It was soft and threaded with a profound sadness. I thought it looked important," Leo stammered, feeling his face flush. "I didn't want it to get lost in a box somewhere." She finally reached out and took the locket, her cool fingers brushing against his calloused palm. The brief contact sent a strange jolt through him. She closed her hand around it, holding it tight. "It was my husband's," she said, her voice barely audible. "He gave it to me on our first anniversary. It has his picture inside." She looked up at him again, her eyes clear and direct. "Thank you." She trailed off, not knowing his name. Leo Martinez." "Thank you, Leo," she said, the name sounding foreign and important on her lips. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a dismissal, but it was a clear end to the conversation. Leo nodded back and retreated from the room, pulling the door quietly shut. As he walked back to his cart, his heart was still pounding, but for a different reason. He had crossed the chasm. He had spoken to the silent CEO, and in her whispered words, he hadn't heard a titan of industry. He had heard a widow clutching the last memento of a man she loved. The brief encounter with Isabella Sterling changed something in the atmosphere of Leo's nights. The silence of the building no longer felt empty. It felt charged with a secret understanding. When he saw her on her late-night wanderings, their eyes would occasionally meet. She would give him that same small, quiet nod of acknowledgement, and he would return it. It was a silent conversation between two lonely souls in a vast empty space. But in the world of daylight, nothing had changed. In fact, things were getting worse. A massive deal was on the horizon, a potential partnership with a Japanese tech conglomerate, Tanaka Corp. The deal was worth nearly $1 billion and was poised to secure Ethelred's future for the next decade. The pressure was immense, and it trickled down through every level of the company, finally pooling in a puddle of anxiety and stress that Mark Corrigan was more than happy to splash onto his subordinates. "Martinez!" Mark's voice echoed down the hallway a week before the Japanese delegation was due to arrive. "The 50th floor needs to be more than clean. It needs to be sanctified. I want to be able to eat off those floors. I want the windows to be so clear that birds get confused. This isn't just a cleaning job. This is corporate diplomacy." For Leo, the pressure was more personal. Lily's doctor had called. Her condition was stable, but a slot had opened up for the experimental procedure. They could take her in 6 weeks, but they needed a down payment of $50,000 to hold the spot. $50,000. It was an astronomical sum, a mountain he had no idea how to climb. Every extra shift, every minute of overtime was a spoonful of dirt chipped away from that mountain. He couldn't afford any mistakes. He couldn't afford to lose this job. The day the delegation from Tanaka Corp arrived, Ethelred Innovations was humming with a nervous energy that was almost visible. Everyone was dressed in their best, smiles plastered on their faces. Leo was tasked with keeping the executive wing pristine throughout the day, a silent shadow ensuring no stray coffee spills or misplaced wastebaskets marred the perfect image of the company. He saw the delegation arrive. Mr. Kenji Tanaka was an older, distinguished gentleman with an air of profound calm. He was flanked by a team of sharp, serious-looking executives. With them was their interpreter, a young professional man. But as the day wore on, disaster began to brew. Leo was in the service closet when he heard the frantic whispers. The interpreter, who had eaten at a local seafood restaurant the night before, had come down with a violent case of food poisoning. He had been rushed to the hospital just an hour before the final, critical negotiation was set to begin. Panic ripped through the executive floor. Mark Corrigan looked pale and sweaty. He was barking into his phone, trying to find a replacement interpreter at a moment's notice. But no one was available. "What about the translation software?" a junior executive asked, his voice trembling slightly. "It's not good enough," another one hissed. "Tanaka-san values nuance, respect, the poetry of business. A computer can't translate that. This is a disaster." Leo watched from the doorway as the carefully constructed facade of corporate perfection began to crumble. He saw Isabella Sterling emerge from her office. Her face was as impassive as ever, but there was a tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. This deal was her husband's legacy, the final piece of a global strategy he had laid out before he died. Its failure would be more than a financial loss. It would be a personal one. They decided to proceed, using a sophisticated translation app on a tablet as a desperate last resort. Leo was tasked with refreshing the water and coffee in the boardroom. He moved with practiced invisibility, slipping in and out, his presence barely registered by the frantic executives. The meeting was a train wreck in slow motion. The app was clunky and literal. It translated words but not meaning. Cultural subtleties were lost. Polite turns of phrase were rendered as blunt, awkward statements. Leo could see the frustration building on Mr. Tanaka's face. The Japanese executive was speaking in English, but it was a formal, slightly archaic, and deeply nuanced English, filled with idioms and literary allusions that the app was utterly failing to comprehend. Mark Corrigan was trying to lead the presentation, his voice slick with a desperate sweat. He was simplifying Ethelred's complex technological proposals into childishly simple terms, hoping the app could keep up. It was insulting. The breaking point came when Mr. Tanaka, in a moment of clear exasperation, leaned forward. He looked directly at Isabella, bypassing the floundering Mark. He spoke slowly, his voice quiet but firm. "Mrs. Sterling, my concern is not with the machine, but with the spirit within. As your great poet John Keats once wrote, 'A thing of beauty is a joy forever. Its loveliness increases. It will never pass into nothingness.' I must be convinced that the soul of your technology possesses this eternal loveliness. Can you tell me, where is the poetry in your code?" Silence. The room was filled with blank, uncomprehending stares. Mark Corrigan's mouth opened and closed like a fish. The translation app simply spat out the literal words, offering no context. They had no idea what he meant. They thought he was asking about poetry. Isabella's face, for the first time, showed a flicker of despair. She looked around the room at her team, at their confused faces, and a shadow of defeat crossed her features. The deal was slipping away. Leo was standing just outside the glass doors, holding a fresh carafe of coffee. He had heard Mr. Tanaka's words, and his mind, the mind that had once lectured on 19th century Romantic poetry to halls of eager university students, understood instantly. It wasn't just a quote, it was a philosophical challenge, a test. His past life, the life of Professor Leo Martinez, expert in comparative literature, came rushing back. He remembered his wife, Sarah, smiling at him from the front row of a lecture hall. He remembered the thrill of unpacking a dense piece of text, of revealing the beautiful, complex machinery of language to others. And he remembered Lily, her small, trusting face. He needed that $50,000. But more than that, in that moment, he saw a woman he had come to feel a strange kinship with, about to lose something she held dear. His hand trembled. This was insane. He was the janitor. He was invisible. To speak up would be to shatter every rule, to invite the full wrath of Mark Corrigan, to risk everything. But to stay silent felt like a betrayal of the man he used to be, and the father he needed to be. He looked at Isabella's downcast face through the glass. He took a deep, shuddering breath. He put the coffee carafe down on a nearby table, straightened his gray uniform, and walked toward the boardroom door. Leo's knuckles rapped twice on the heavy glass door. The sound was quiet, yet in the tomb-like silence of the boardroom, it cracked like a thunderclap. Every head in the room swiveled towards the door. 20 pairs of eyes, confused, annoyed, panicked, fixed on the janitor. Mark Corrigan's face, already pale with stress, contorted into a mask of pure fury. He looked as if he was about to physically eject Leo from the 50th floor. Leo pushed the door open and stepped inside. He ignored Mark's murderous glare. He ignored the bewildered looks from the other executives. His eyes found Mr. Tanaka, and then he glanced at Isabella Sterling. Her face was a blank slate of shock. "Forgive my intrusion," Leo said. His voice was calm and steady, devoid of the janitorial deference he usually affected. It was the voice of a professor addressing a lecture hall, clear, confident, and resonant. Mark Corrigan shot to his feet. "Martinez, what in God's name do you think you're doing? Get out, now!" Leo held up a hand, a small, placating gesture, but his eyes never left Mr. Tanaka. He inclined his head respectfully toward the Japanese businessman. "Tanaka-san," Leo began, his English flawless, with the faint, clipped cadence of someone educated at Oxford. "You quote Keats, a poet who believed that truth and beauty were intertwined. He was not speaking of aesthetics alone, but of an underlying, perfect design. The poetry you seek in our code is not in its language, but in its architecture. It's in the elegant simplicity of its function, the way it solves a complex problem so seamlessly it feels intuitive, natural. Like a perfect sonnet, its structure is rigid and disciplined, yet what it expresses is boundless. The beauty is not in what it says, but in what it empowers us to do. That is its joy forever." Dead. Silence. The world seemed to stop spinning. The junior executives stared, their mouths agape. The members of the Japanese delegation, who had been looking bored and frustrated, now sat bolt upright, their eyes wide with astonishment. Mark Corrigan looked as if he'd been struck by lightning, his face a comical mixture of rage and utter disbelief. But Leo was only looking at two people. Mr. Tanaka's impassive facial expression had melted away, replaced by a slow, spreading smile of genuine delight and profound respect. He gave a slight, formal bow of his head from his seated position. And Isabella Sterling. She was staring at Leo as if she had never seen him before. The mask was gone, utterly and completely gone. Her dark eyes, usually so guarded, were wide with 1,000 questions. It was as if he had spoken a magic word and brought a statue to life. For the first time, she was not seeing a janitor, a uniform, or a function. She was seeing a man. Mr. Tanaka responded, this time in Japanese. He spoke a long, complex sentence, his tone animated and curious. Before anyone could even fumble for the translation app, Leo replied fluently in Japanese, his pronunciation precise, his tone respectful. Another wave of shock rippled through the room. The jaws of the Ethelred team, which had been hanging open, somehow dropped even further. Mark Corrigan sank back into his chair, his face the color of ash. Isabella stood up slowly. Her movements were fluid, graceful, but her eyes were locked on Leo. She still hadn't spoken, but her entire being was focused on him. Mr. Tanaka then switched back to English. "Mr. Martinez, Leo Martinez," Leo supplied calmly. "Mr. Martinez," Mr. Tanaka said, his smile broadening. "You have a surprising depth of talent on your staff, Mrs. Sterling. We have been discussing the technical specifications for an hour with no progress. In 2 minutes, this man has captured the very philosophy of your company. Perhaps he should be the one to lead this discussion." The implication hung in the air, a devastating blow to Mark Corrigan and a shocking validation for the man holding the mop just minutes earlier. The rest of the meeting was surreal. Leo, standing awkwardly at first in his janitor's uniform, became the bridge between the two companies. At Isabella's quiet but firm gesture, he was given a seat at the table, much to the visible horror of Mark Corrigan. He didn't just translate, he contextualized. He understood the technical jargon from Ethelred's engineers and could rephrase it using the honorifics and business etiquette prized by the Japanese team. He fielded questions, explained complex concepts, and built a rapport with Mr. Tanaka that the entire executive team had failed to achieve. He spoke of code with the passion of a poet and of business with the precision of a scholar. 2 hours later, Mr. Tanaka stood up. He walked around the table and extended his hand to Isabella. "Mrs. Sterling," he said, "you have a remarkable company and a remarkable team. My concerns have been eloquently addressed. We have a deal." He then turned to Leo and bowed deeply. "Martinez-san," he said, the honorific a mark of immense respect. It was a privilege. Leo, flustered for the first time, bowed in return. As the Japanese delegation was escorted out, buzzing with positive energy, the Ethelred team remained frozen in the boardroom. The silence that returned was heavier and more profound than before. It was the silence of a world turned upside tilted. Finally, Mark Corrigan found his voice. It was dripping with venom. "Well, that was quite the performance, Martinez, but you are fired, effective immediately. Insubordination, misrepresenting your position, disrupting a client meeting. Take your pick, get your things, and be out of this building in 30 minutes. Leo's heart plummeted. He had expected this. He had saved the deal, but he had broken the rules. He had flown too close to the sun, and his wax wings were melting. He looked at the floor, the triumph of the moment evaporating into the cold dread of unemployment. How would he ever get the money for Lily now? He prepared to turn and leave, to accept his fate. No. The word was quiet, but it cut through the room with the authority of a judge's gavel. Everyone turned to Isabella Sterling. She was standing at the head of the table, her hands resting on its polished surface. The silent CEO had spoken. She looked directly at Mark Corrigan, her eyes as cold and hard as diamonds. "You will do no such thing. You are dismissed for the day, Mark, as is the rest of the team." It was an order, not a suggestion. The executives, including a sputtering Mark, scrambled to gather their things and flee the room, their curiosity warring with their fear. Within a minute, the boardroom was empty except for two people, the janitor and the CEO. Isabella Sterling walked towards him. She stopped a few feet away, her gaze intense, searching. "Leo Martinez," she said, her voice a low murmur, "I think you and I have a great deal to talk about." The walk to Isabella Sterling's office was the longest of Leo's life. He followed her silently, acutely aware of his worn, rubber-soled shoes squeaking softly on the marble floors he himself had polished. He could feel the stares of the few remaining secretaries and assistants in the executive wing. They looked at him, then at Isabella, their faces a mixture of confusion and awe. The company grapevine was already buzzing. Her office was even more intimidating from the inside. One entire wall was a floor-to-ceiling window offering a breathtaking panorama of the city. The furniture was minimalist and elegant. A large oak desk kept impeccably clear, two sleek chairs, and a single abstract painting on the wall. There were no personal photos, no clutter. It was the office of someone who had sealed themselves off from the world. She gestured for him to sit in one of the chairs opposite her desk. He did so hesitantly, feeling out of place in his gray uniform. She didn't sit behind the desk, creating a barrier. Instead, she took the other chair, so they were sitting opposite each other, equals. For a long moment, she just studied him, her head tilted slightly. The silence stretched, but it wasn't the empty, awkward silence of the boardroom. It was an inquisitive silence, a silence that demanded answers. "Oxford?" she finally asked, her voice soft. Leo was taken aback by the directness of the question. He nodded. "Balliol College, Ph.D. in comparative literature, with a focus on post-war Japanese and English poetry." A flicker of understanding crossed her face. "That explains the Keats and the Japanese." She leaned forward slightly. "The obvious question, Leo, is why are you mopping my floors?" Leo swallowed. The story felt heavy, a burden he hadn't shared with anyone in years. But looking into her eyes that were no longer vacant, but sharp with intelligence and a surprising degree of empathy, he felt compelled to tell the truth. "My wife, Sarah, passed away 5 years ago," he began, his voice quiet. "She was an art historian. We had a life, an academic life. It was all we knew. After she died, I tried to keep it together for our daughter, Lily. But the grief, it was paralyzing. And then Lily got sick. He explained Lily's heart condition, the mounting medical bills that had swallowed his savings and then his pension. He told her about the specialists in Baltimore, the reason he'd moved to the States, leaving his old life and career behind entirely. He didn't have the right credentials to teach at a university level here without a long and expensive recertification process. He needed money, and he needed it now, so he took any job he could get. Being a janitor, it's honest work, he finished, a touch of defiance in his voice, and it's anonymous. Most days I appreciated that. Isabella listened without interruption, her gaze never leaving his face. When he finished, she was silent for another long moment, processing everything he had said. "You didn't just save a deal today, Leo," she said, her voice firm. "You saved my husband's legacy. This partnership with Tanaka was his vision, his final project. Its failure would have been unacceptable." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city. After Richard died, the words stopped making sense. Meetings felt like noise. The business, this empire we built, it all felt like a ghost limb. I could feel it, but I couldn't command it. So I went silent. It was easier to issue orders through emails than to try and find a voice that no longer had its echo. She turned back to him. "Today, in that boardroom, when you spoke, you gave this company its voice back, a more eloquent and effective voice than it's had in a year." She walked to her desk and picked up a tablet. She tapped on it a few times. "Mark Corrigan has been placed on administrative leave, pending a review of his professional conduct." She looked up, her expression unyielding. "I do not tolerate managers who see people as functions instead of assets." Leo's head was spinning. Fired. Rehired. A confidential confession from the CEO. It was too much to process. "Leo, I'm not offering you your old job back," she continued, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips for the first time. "That would be the single worst business decision I could make. Ethelred Innovations has a communications problem. We have brilliant engineers and strategists, but we struggle to tell our story, to connect on a human level. We saw that today." She paused, her eyes locking onto his. "I'm creating a new position, special consultant to the CEO for strategic communications. It would involve liaising with our international partners, refining our corporate messaging, and, frankly, being the humanizing voice in this machine that I have been unable to be. The salary would be commensurate with the importance of the role." Leo stared at her, speechless. A special consultant. A salary. It was a lifeline so grand, so far beyond his wildest dreams, that it felt like a hallucination. I don't have any corporate experience," he stammered. "I'm a poet, a teacher." "Exactly," she replied. "I have enough corporate experience in this building to launch a mission to Mars. I need a poet. I need someone who understands that the language we use is as important as the technology we build." She named a salary figure. It was a number so large that Leo felt the air leave his lungs. It wasn't just enough to cover Lily's down payment. It was enough to cover the entire procedure, with plenty left over. It was enough to change everything. Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes, and he fought them back fiercely. He hadn't cried when Sarah died. He hadn't cried when Lily was diagnosed. He wouldn't cry now. He cleared his throat and stood up, trying to regain some semblance of composure. "Mrs. Sterling, Isabella, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll accept," she said simply. "Report here tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. We'll arrange HR, a security pass, and an office for you on this floor. And Leo?" "Yes?" "Come in through the front door, and please wear a suit." As Leo left her office and rode the elevator down, he felt like he was floating. When he stepped out into the grand lobby, the night security guard, a man named Frank, who he'd shared coffee with 100 times, did a double take. "Leo, what were you doing up on the 50th floor? Everything okay?" Leo looked at his friend, then around the gleaming lobby he had spent countless hours mopping. He felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if he had just stepped out of one life and into another. "Everything's okay, Frank," Leo said, a real, genuine smile spreading across his face for the first time in years. "Everything is about to be okay." The transformation of Leo Martinez was the stuff of corporate legend. One day he was the janitor people looked through. The next, he was the man walking beside the CEO, a tailored suit having replaced his gray uniform. His first week was a whirlwind of introductions, meetings, and bewildered stares. He was given a spacious office just down the hall from Isabella's, with the same stunning view of the city. The news of Mark Corrigan's indefinite leave and the janitor's meteoric promotion sent shockwaves through the company. To many, it was an incomprehensible fairy tale. But to those who worked closely with the new special consultant, his value became apparent almost immediately. Leo approached corporate strategy like a literary text. He read between the lines of market reports, found the hidden narratives in sales data, and listened for the subtext in partner negotiations. His background as a literature professor gave him a unique perspective. He saw patterns and motivations that the business school graduates missed entirely. He and Isabella fell into a natural, effective rhythm. Their days were filled with meetings and strategy sessions, but their most productive work happened in the quiet hours of the evening, long after everyone else had gone home. It was a return to the time of day they had once shared as silent ghosts, but now the silence was filled with conversation. In her office, over containers of takeout food, they would talk for hours. The conversation started with business, the nuances of a contract with a German firm, the best way to frame a new product launch. But they would inevitably drift into more personal territory. He learned about Richard Sterling, not as a business icon, but as a man. He was a brilliant, chaotic force of nature who scribbled code on napkins and dreamed up world-changing ideas in the middle of the night. Isabella had been his anchor, the one who could take his beautiful, abstract chaos and shape it into a functional billion-dollar reality. He used to quote poetry all the time, she told Leo one evening, a sad smile on her face as she looked at the silver locket she now wore every day. Keats was his favorite. He said great technology, like great art, should strive for a kind of immortality. That's what Mr. Tanaka's question. That's why it hit so hard. It felt like Richard was in the room testing me. In return, Leo opened up about his own life. He told her about Sarah, about their shared love for old books and quiet Sunday afternoons in museums. He talked about Lily, not just her illness, but her spirit, her fierce intelligence, her goofy sense of humor, her unwavering belief that her daddy could fix anything. He showed Isabella a picture on his phone. It was Lily in a hospital bed, a tangle of wires around her. But she was grinning at the camera, giving a thumbs up. Isabella looked at the photo for a long time, her expression softening in a way Leo had never seen. She's beautiful, Leo. She has your eyes. A deep, powerful bond was forming between them. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was something rarer and perhaps more profound, a partnership built on shared grief, mutual intellect, and a profound respect for the hidden depths in one another. Leo found his voice again, not just as a professional, but as a man, and Isabella slowly began to smile again. The employees started to notice small changes, a hint of warmth in her emails, the rare sound of her quiet laughter drifting from her office during a late-night meeting with Leo. The color was beginning to return to her world, but not everyone was celebrating this new chapter. Mark Corrigan, stewing in his forced exile, was consumed by a bitter and obsessive rage. He couldn't accept that he had been bested and replaced by a janitor. It defied the natural order of his world. He convinced himself there had to be something fraudulent about Leo Martinez. He had to be a con man, a charlatan who had somehow played the grieving CEO. Mark started digging. He hired a private investigator, a seedy man named Peterson who specialized in finding dirt. He wanted everything on Leo Martinez. His work history, his financials, his life back in the UK. Find something, Mark ordered Peterson over a clandestine meeting in a dimly lit bar. A criminal record, a falsified degree, a hidden debt. Anything I can use to prove to the board that Sterling has lost her mind and put a fraud in a position of power. The investigator started digging. At first, he found nothing. Leo's record was spotless. His credentials from Oxford were impeccable, but Mark pushed him harder. Dig into the daughter, the medical situation. There's always something there. Peterson's inquiries eventually led him to the complex world of international medical visas and financial aid applications. And there, buried in a mountain of paperwork, he found it. A small discrepancy. When Leo had first come to the U.S., desperate and overwhelmed, he had applied for a temporary work visa. On one of the supplemental forms regarding financial dependence, in a moment of confusion and exhaustion, he had slightly misstated his projected income from his academic pension in the UK, making it seem smaller than it was to qualify for a particular medical assistance program for Lily in the early days. It was a minor, unintentional error, one that had been corrected months later and had no bearing on his current legal status. But on paper, it could be twisted. It could be made to look like deliberate fraud. Peterson brought the document to Mark. A venomous, triumphant smile spread across Mark's face. "Fraud," he hissed, tapping the paper. "He lied on a federal document to get benefits. This isn't just a con man, he's a criminal. This is it. This is what will bring him down." Armed with his weapon, Mark Corrigan prepared to re-enter the world of Ethelred Innovations. He wasn't just going to get his job back. He was going to destroy Leo Martinez and expose Isabella Sterling as an incompetent, emotionally compromised leader in the process. He requested an emergency meeting with the company's board of directors, promising to reveal information critical to the integrity and security of the company. The day of the board meeting was gray and overcast, the sky mirroring the anxiety churning in Leo's stomach. He didn't know the specifics of what was happening, only that Mark Corrigan had requested an emergency session with the board and that his and Isabella's presence was required. Isabella had been quiet and tense all morning, the mask of the silent CEO slipping back into place as she prepared for battle. They walked into the boardroom together. The long mahogany table was lined with the stern, expectant faces of the board members, powerful, wealthy individuals who held the fate of Ethelred in their hands. At the opposite end of the table sat Mark Corrigan, a smug, predatory smile on his face. "Thank you for coming," Mark began, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "I know this is unusual, but I have uncovered a serious issue of fraud and misrepresentation at the highest level of this company, which poses a significant risk to us all." He proceeded to lay out his case, handing out copies of the visa document Peterson had found. He twisted the narrative masterfully, painting Leo not as a desperate father, but as a calculating grifter who had schemed his way into the country, lied to federal authorities, and manipulated a grieving CEO to gain power and position. "This man, Leo Martinez, is not who he appears to be," Mark declared, his voice rising with theatrical indignation. "He is a fraud who has compromised the integrity of this office. And I must sadly conclude that Mrs. Sterling's emotional state has allowed her judgment to become so clouded that she has become a liability to the company her husband built." The board members murmured amongst themselves, their expressions growing concerned as they looked from the document to Leo and then to Isabella. Leo felt the blood drain from his face. The small, forgotten error from years ago was being brandished as a weapon to destroy everything he had built. He opened his mouth to defend himself, to explain the context, but his words caught in his throat. Before he could speak, however, his phone vibrated violently in his pocket. It was the hospital, his heart seized with a cold, terrifying dread. He never got calls from the hospital unless it was an emergency. He looked at Isabella, his eyes wide with panic. She saw his expression and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Permission granted." Leo stumbled out of the boardroom, his hands shaking as he answered the call. It was Lily's doctor. Her condition had taken a sudden turn, an arrhythmia. They needed to stabilize her immediately. She was asking for him. The world narrowed to a single point of terror. The board meeting, Mark Corrigan, his job, none of it mattered. Only Lily mattered. He burst back into the boardroom, his face ashen. "It's my daughter," he choked out, looking at Isabella. "I have to go. Now." Mark Corrigan scoffed. "How convenient. A sudden family emergency when your lies are exposed." But Isabella was already on her feet. She ignored Mark completely. All the coldness, all the tension was gone from her face, replaced by a fierce, protective focus. "Go, Leo," she commanded. "I'll handle this." She turned to her assistant, who was standing by the door. "Eleanor, get the company car to the front entrance for Mr. Martinez, now, and call my personal pilot. Have the jet ready to fly to Baltimore." The entire room stared, stunned. A company jet? For a janitor-turned-consultant's daughter? As Leo rushed out, Isabella turned back to the board, her spine rigid, her eyes blazing with a fire no one had seen in over a year. "Mark is correct about one thing," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "My judgment was clouded. For the past year, I have allowed my grief to silence me, to make me passive. I have allowed men like Mark Corrigan, men with no vision, no empathy, and an abundance of petty ambition, to fester in the halls of this company. That ends today." She walked slowly down the length of the table, her gaze sweeping over the board members. "The document he has presented you is a desperate, pathetic attempt to weaponize a father's love for his child. Did Leo Martinez make a mistake on a form years ago while trying to save his daughter's life? Perhaps. But let me tell you who Leo Martinez truly is. He is the man who single-handedly saved the Tanaka deal, a deal none of you thought I could close. He is the man who has spent the last 2 months brilliantly reshaping our global communication strategy. He is a man of integrity, intellect, and profound decency. He represents the very best of this company's soul, the part that Mark Corrigan could never and will never understand." She finally stopped in front of Mark, who seemed to shrink in his chair under her glare. "Mark, you are fired, not for this pathetic stunt, but for a complete and utter failure to understand the most basic principle of this company. Our people are our greatest asset. Your security pass has been deactivated. I suggest you leave before I have you escorted out." She then turned back to the stunned board. Ethelred Innovations is not just a technology company, it is a community, and we take care of our own. Leo Martinez is one of our own. His daughter's medical emergency is now this company's emergency. We will be covering all of her medical expenses and ensuring she gets the absolute best care on the planet. Is that understood? There was a moment of shocked silence, and then the chairman of the board, a grizzled veteran named Arthur Vance, broke into a slow smile. "It's good to have you back, Isabella," he said. The other board members nodded in agreement. The power in the room had shifted, decisively and irrevocably. Isabella didn't wait for their full consensus. She was already walking out of the room, dialing her phone. Leo was halfway to the hospital when she called him. "Leo, how is she?" "They're working on her," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I'm almost there." "I'm on my way," she said, her voice calm and strong, a rock in his swirling sea of panic. "I'll meet you there. You are not alone in this, Leo. Do you hear me? You are not alone." And in that moment, Leo knew it was true. In the sterile, gleaming hallways of Ethelred Innovations, a janitor had found his voice, a silent CEO had found her heart, and 2 lonely, broken families were about to become one. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it was filled with the one thing neither of them had dared to feel: hope. Leo and Isabella's story isn't just about a change in job title. It's a powerful reminder that our true worth is never defined by the uniform we wear or the position we hold. It's written in our character, our hidden talents, and the compassion we show to others. It proves that in a world that often judges by surface appearances, looking deeper can change lives. Lily's surgery was a success, paid for by the company that now saw her father as one of its greatest assets. And Ethelred Innovations, under the renewed leadership of a CEO who had found her voice and the guidance of a consultant who understood the poetry of human connection, entered its most prosperous era. Their story reminds us to never underestimate the person standing next to you. You never know what brilliance, what kindness, what extraordinary potential lies just beneath the surface. If this story touched your heart, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs a reminder that hope can be found in the most unexpected places. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that inspire and uplift. Thank you for watching.